My name is Maren Alcott. S.End. I turned 70 last spring. I have always believed that good manners and a steady hand can keep a family stitched together, the way a careful seam keeps a quilt from fraying. That morning, I sat at my kitchen table in Madison, sunlight falling through the lace curtains, and tied a pale silk ribbon around a square box of crystal glasses, my wedding gift for my daughter, Celia. The edges of the wrapping paper were crisp, perfectly folded, a small act of order in a world that often refused to be neat. The kettle clicked off, and I poured tea into my favorite porcelain cup. The invitation still sat on the counter beside it, ivory paper, gold-pressed letters. Saturday, June 22nd. I'd read those words a dozen times, memorizing them like a promise. Tomorrow. My daughter's wedding was tomorrow. I planned to stop by my sister Viola's house to drop off a scarf I had knitted for her. When I arrived, she was trimming roses on her porch. The air smelled like rain and earth. I held up the wrapped box proudly. "Crystal," I said. "Something beautiful for the toast. I can't wait for the ceremony tomorrow." Viola's shears stopped midair. Her hand trembled slightly. "Tomorrow," she repeated. I laughed, thinking she had misheard me. "Yes." Saturday, at the lakeside garden, Celia's wedding. The silence stretched, heavy and strange. Viola looked away, toward the lilacs by her gate, and then back at me with eyes full of something I couldn't name. "Maren," she said softly. "It was last week." At first, I thought she was joking. I waited for her to smile, to tell me she was teasing, but her lips didn't move. She took her phone from her pocket, hesitated, and handed it to me. The screen lit up with photographs: Celia in a lace gown, Leon beside her, smiling under strings of lights, my brothers, my nieces, my cousins all there, even Viola, in a floral dress I hadn't seen before. Every face was glowing with joy. Every seat was filled, except mine. The ribbon slipped from my fingers. The box of crystal shook in my hands, light catching the glass like a tremor. Somewhere inside me, a quiet seam began to tear. I drove home in a daze, the afternoon light blurring through the windshield. My hands stayed tight around the steering wheel, the same way they had clutched that box of crystal until my fingers ached. The moment I stepped inside, the quiet of my kitchen felt unnatural, like the silence after a slammed door. The invitation was still there on the counter where I had left it, heavy, expensive paper, gold ink catching the light. Saturday, June 22nd. I read the words again, tracing the edges as if they might rearrange themselves. Viola had to be mistaken. There was no way my daughter, my only child, could do something like that. I picked up my phone and called Celia. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. I tried again and again. Each ring seemed to stretch thinner until it was only air. My throat burned. I opened my contacts and scrolled to the name I hadn't called in years, Leon. He answered on the second ring. His voice was still that smooth, patient tone I remembered from long ago. "Maren," he said quietly. I swallowed. "Leon, where's Celia? I just spoke with Viola. She said the wedding was last week." There was a pause, then a small sigh. "We thought it would be easier this way, easier than what." My voice cracked around the words. He hesitated. "You know how she is. Maren, she gets anxious. She didn't want complications." Complications. That was the word they used for me. I hung up before he could soften it further. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the stillness. On the counter sat the bottle of champagne I had bought for the reception, beads of condensation forming along its neck. I reached for it, then stopped. It would never be opened. Through the open window, I heard the sound of my neighbors laughing in their backyard, the faint clink of glasses carried on the wind. Their voices rose and fell, bright and careless. I stood there, the invitation trembling in my hands. Realizing the celebration was already over and I had never even been meant to arrive. That night I couldn't sleep. The invitation lay on the counter, its gold letters dull in the half-light. I kept reading it, as though the paper might admit it had lied to me. But there was no mistake, only me, sitting in the stillness of a house that had heard too much waiting. When Celia was born, I promised myself she'd never have to wait for anything. Leon had already begun to fade from our marriage, his absences explained by work trips that grew longer each season. By the time Celia was 10, I was signing the divorce papers alone, pretending it didn't hurt. I took a job at the Madison Public Library shelving books and helping children find their first stories. I loved the quiet there, the hum of the lights, the smell of paper and dust. I skipped lunches to save a few extra dollars, and every spring I set something aside for Celia's college fund. Back then, our apartment was small but full of laughter. She'd sit at the kitchen table drawing pictures while I made soup from scratch. But as she grew older, the laughter changed. It became careful, measured. I remember her 15th birthday, her friends in expensive shoes. Me in the same navy cardigan I'd worn for years. She looked at me across the room, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Mom, you embarrass me," she whispered after the party. I laughed it off then, but the words stayed. Later came college, a new city, new friends. I sent care packages filled with small things, her favorite tea, handmade scarves, notes written late at night. She thanked me in short messages, always polite, never personal. I convinced myself it was enough. Through every milestone, graduation, new job, engagement, there was always a table somewhere filled with people who loved her. And a single empty chair that might have been mine. Now, at 70, I see it clearly. I spent decades folding myself smaller, thinking silence was the price of being loved. But silence doesn't buy love. It only buys absence. And I had paid for it in full. 2 days passed before Viola came by. She stood on my porch holding a small envelope, her face drawn and careful. "You deserve to know," she said, pressing it into my hand. Inside was a plain silver USB stick. No note. No explanation. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I had wrapped the crystal box. The afternoon light slanted through the blinds, narrow and pale. I plugged the drive into my old laptop. A folder opened Celia and Graham. June 15. There were hundreds of photographs. My fingers hovered above the keys before I clicked the first one. The images flickered across the screen in slow rhythm. Celia, in her lace gown beneath strings of lights. Leon raising a glass. Guests laughing in the garden. Tables glowing under soft lanterns. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. I kept scrolling, though every picture struck like a quiet blow. Then I saw it, the quilt. It was draped across a bench beside the dance floor, folded neatly, the edge of the rose-patterned stitching catching the light. I had sewn that quilt years ago, right after my hip surgery. Each square chosen for a season of her life, autumn leaves for her first recital, lilac for the year she graduated, silver thread through the center for good fortune. The caption beneath the photo read, "Family heirloom, maker unknown." I stared at the words until they blurred, my hand pressed against the screen, as if touch could rewrite the truth. Maker unknown. I could still feel the ache in my shoulder from every hour I spent stitching that thing by lamplight. For a long while, I didn't move. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. The house breathed around me. Then I reached for the lid and closed the laptop gently. The sound small but final. I thought grief would come first, but it didn't. What came was something colder, cleaner, an anger so steady it almost felt like calm, the kind that doesn't shout, only remembers. By the third morning, The anger had settled into something steady enough to drive on. The road along Lake Mendota shimmered beneath the sun, the water flickering like broken glass beside it. I knew every turn. I had once driven this way to help Celia and Leon move into their new house, a down payment I had quietly covered when their mortgage stalled. I never asked for credit. I just wanted her to have something stable. Their house stood pale and perfect against the blue of the lake, its wide windows reflecting the sky. I parked at the curb and sat for a moment, palms flat against the steering wheel, feeling the pulse of my heartbeat in them. Then I stepped out. Celia opened the door before I could knock twice. Her smile appeared automatically, the one she used for neighbors and delivery men. When she saw me, it faltered. "Mom," she said, her voice uncertain. "What are you doing here? I just wanted to see my daughter." My voice came out calm, too calm. Leon appeared behind her, shoulders tense. "Maren, this isn't a good time. I think I missed quite a few of those already," I said. Celia's face reddened. She folded her arms, looking everywhere but at me. "I didn't want it to be like this," she whispered. "I just thought it would be easier. Easier for who I asked. For you," she said quickly, though her eyes gave her away. "I didn't want you to feel out of place. Everyone there was from Graham's side, different background, different crowd. You would have hated it." I felt the words land one by one, careful, practiced, cruel in their polish. "You didn't want me there," I said quietly, not my comfort, just my absence. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind off the lake moved through the birches, cool against my skin. I could have cried, but I didn't. I turned, walked down the path I had once helped them plant with lilies, and didn't look back. That evening, the lake wind followed me home, carrying the smell of damp earth and lilacs through the open window. I left my coat on the chair and walked straight to the study. The drawers still held every record of a life spent keeping things together: tax slips, insurance notices, the old tin box that once held my savings when paychecks barely stretched to the next month. I unlocked the bottom drawer and pulled out the safe files I hadn't touched in years. The folders were thick, edges softened from use. I spread them across the table. The sound of paper whispering against wood, property deeds, payment records, a thin folder labeled Alcott Trust, LLC. The memory came back easily. 8 years ago, Celia and Leon had called in panic, the bank threatening foreclosure after a run of bad investments. I'd gone with them to the meeting, silent while they explained themselves, silent when the manager mentioned numbers they couldn't meet. Later, when they moved out temporarily, I bought the mortgage through my limited company, filed the paperwork quietly, and let them return as if nothing had changed. They paid no rent. I paid the taxes. I even set up automatic transfers to cover their utilities. It had seemed kind at the time, a way to help without wounding their pride. Now the proof sat before me, neat and absolute. The house that held their laughter, their dinner parties, their wedding plans. It had always been mine. I traced my signature on the last page. Remembering the day I signed it back then, I'd thought it was love. Now it looked more like a silence I'd mistaken for grace. They thought miracles happened, I whispered, but the miracle was me. I gathered the papers into one stack and placed them back in the folder, aligning the edges until they were straight again. Then I sat back, letting the hum of the refrigerator fill the room. For the first time in years, the balance between what I gave and what I lost felt visible, written in black ink, no longer hidden behind kindness. By Monday morning, I knew what I had to do. The decision didn't arrive in a burst of courage. It came quietly, like the slow clearing of fog. I found the number for the attorney who had helped me years ago with the trust paperwork. Her name was Dr. Rosalind Pratt, a woman known for precision and a tone that managed to be both firm and gentle. When I arrived at her office, she greeted me with a small smile. "It's been a long time, Mrs. Alcott. What brings you back?" I placed the folder on her desk. "I need to make things clear," I said. Rosalind flipped through the documents, her brow knitting slightly as she read. "You own the property through your company. They're living there rent-free, and there's no formal agreement. You've been covering all expenses." I nodded. She leaned back. "You can revoke occupancy or renegotiate the terms, but before you decide, tell me, do you want justice or peace?" I thought about the wedding photos, the quilt, the phone that never rang. "Just honesty," I said. Rosalind studied me for a moment, then began drafting a letter. The words were simple and exact, stripped of sentiment. It stated that Celia and Leon must either meet to resolve the unpaid trust or vacate the property within 30 days. I watched as she printed it, her hands steady, each line sounding like the truth finally spoken out loud. When I stopped by Viola's house that evening, she read the letter twice. "Maren, you'll look cruel," she whispered. I folded the paper and slid it back into its envelope. Cruelty started when I was erased. The mail carrier passed by just before dusk. I walked to the end of the driveway, feeling the soft weight of the letter in my hand, when I slipped it into the box and closed the metal flap. The sound was small but complete, like a door shutting somewhere deep inside me. One envelope, sealed after decades of silence, now carrying the truth I had spent a lifetime avoiding. The rain began before dusk, fine and steady, washing the last color from the maple leaves. I was pouring tea when headlights swept across my porch. For a moment, I thought it might be Viola. But then I saw her Celia, standing in the rain without an umbrella, her hair plastered to her cheeks. I opened the door before she could knock. "You'd evict your own daughter." Her voice trembled, more from anger than cold. I kept one hand on the doorframe. "You excluded your own mother." She blinked hard, the way she used to when she was a child caught in a lie. "I didn't mean to," she said. "You don't understand what it's like. Everyone there. Graham's family, his co-workers. They notice everything." I was ashamed. "All right. They said you'd look out of place, poor, outdated." The words landed heavy, each one colder than the rain running down her sleeves. I felt the ache rise in my chest, but my voice stayed even. "You were ashamed of the hands that built your home." She looked down, breathing fast. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "I thought keeping things simple would make it easier." "It did," I said quietly. "For you." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The porch light glowed between us, catching the steam from my cup. Then Celia reached into her tote and pulled out the quilt. It was folded neatly, rain beading along the fabric, the rose-patterned stitching still bright under the light. "I can't keep this," she said. "It feels wrong now." I stepped forward and touched the edge of it. The thread smooth beneath my fingertips. Every square I had sewn carried a piece of a life that no longer fit either of us. "Keep it," I said. "You'll need to remember who stitched your beginnings." Her lip quivered, but she didn't argue. She turned, clutching the quilt to her chest, and walked down the path. I watched until her figure disappeared into the blur of rain, the sound of her footsteps fading into the water, pooling at the end of the drive. The movers came on a gray morning, their footsteps echoing through rooms that had already forgotten who once filled them. I watched from the porch as they carried out boxes labeled with Celia's handwriting, kitchenware, linens, books. Each label looked neat, almost proud, and I wondered if she'd written them through tears or indifference. Inside, the air smelled of cardboard and dust. I had set aside a small box of my own Celia's baby blanket, her first library card, a drawing she made in second grade of a house with a crooked roof and a garden full of tulips. I couldn't throw those away. Some things belonged to memory, not ownership. By the third week, Leon's attorney sent a polite request for a delay. I let Rosalind handle the response. When the court upheld my right to reclaim the property, she called to tell me the decision. Her tone was calm, almost tender. "It's done," she said. I thanked her, though gratitude didn't feel like the right word. What I felt was steadiness, the quiet kind that doesn't announce itself. A week later, Viola stopped by with cinnamon bread. She walked through the front room, now nearly bare, and said, "It's so quiet in here." I smiled. That's the sound of something being set right. She looked at me carefully. "Are you lonely?" I shook my head. "No, not lonely." Together, we pushed the old sofa against the wall and cleared space for something new. By the end of the afternoon, we had arranged a few shelves, a rug, and a row of children's books I'd kept from the library's donation pile. When the neighborhood kids came by, shy at first, their laughter filled the corners where arguments used to live. As evening settled, Viola stood in the doorway, watching them read and whisper to one another. "It feels different," she said softly. "It should," I told her. Peace isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of permission. Outside, the porch light flickered on by its timer, casting a steady glow across the yard, a quiet signal that the house, at last, belonged to itself again. A year passed before I realized how quickly peace had begun to take root. The house by the lake had settled into its quiet rhythm, mornings with tea by the window, afternoons filled with children's voices drifting from the reading nook. When spring returned, the city asked if I would help host a Mother's Day community dinner at the Art Center downtown. I said yes, without thinking too hard about why. On the evening of the event, the old brick hall was strung with white lights and tables borrowed from neighbors. A hand-painted sign hung above the entrance, "Everyone welcome." It wavered slightly in the breeze. Letters uneven, but full of care. People arrived carrying casseroles, garden salads, and store-bought pies still warm in their boxes. Some came with mothers, others with memories. Viola stood beside me as we arranged the food. "You did this," she said, handing me a tray of bread. "We did," I answered. "It feels right." When dinner began, the room filled with soft noise chairs scraping, laughter rising, a boy chasing a dropped napkin across the floor. I sat near the end of the table, watching faces I barely knew pass bowls and stories between them. Across from me, a little girl reached for the last piece of cake, the one with the uneven frosting and a corner that had begun to lean. Her mother smiled, letting her take it. I couldn't help but laugh. There was something beautiful about imperfection being the first thing chosen. As dusk deepened, Viola lifted her glass quietly. "To the seat that was never offered," she said, her voice steady, "now offered to all." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The string lights flickered against the windows, soft as candlelight, and I felt the ache inside me ease in a way it never had before. Around the table, strangers kept talking, their words weaving into one long hum of contentment. I looked at the faces, the mismatched plates, the laughter shared without invitation. The glow of it reached me like warmth through glass. A mother's love should never have to beg for a seat.